Today we're going to do a blind amp sim shootout, and we're going to see if you can tell between a free amp from 10 years ago and a modern day premium amp from Neural DSP. Sounds easy, right? I'm sure you'll all get it. But you might find it more difficult than you think. I don't think I could pass this blind shootout if someone else gave it to me and rearranged the orders, and I created it and I worked on it. I ran this little experiment to see how much amp sim technology has changed over the years and to see how much better a modern day flagship model is compared to free software that's over a decade old. I expected some big difference in terms of the overall quality of the sound or some sort of secret sauce that makes expensive modern amp sims sound so much better. I think the answer to that one mostly comes down to improvements in impulse response speaker capturing. So here's the setup. I've got 6 different amp sims. I've got the Poulin Legion and the Le456, which is an Angle model. These are 2 plugins that I've been using for a long time. They were probably some of the first amp sims I ever got my hands on. By no means cheap and crappy amp sims just because they were released for free, but they are free, and both of them date back to a little over 10 years ago. I also have the Ignite Emissary, another big, very popular amp that's recommended all the time. I recommend it. I think it's a great amp, and that's free. That's only 6 years old now. It was released, I think, around 2015. Then I've got the modern ones. I've got the Sigma version 2 from Audio Assault, and I'm a big fan of Audio Assault in the last couple months, and I've done some videos on it. I will do more because I really like their plugins, and considering the price of their amps versus Neural DSP and the fact that you get a very similar experience and set of features is really worth a lot. Usually their amps on sale for $10. Even when they're not on sale, they're $20 or $30. At either price point, they're worth it. But they also have regular sales all the time. So you can really buy them all, and I have pretty much. But I really like them. And they have a great bass amp too. From the Archetype Gojira suite from Neural DSP, I have both the high gain amps, the Rust amp and the Hot amp. And I really like the Archetype Gojira suite as well. I use that a lot. They're fantastic amps. The cabs are great, and I have no complaints with it. But it is the most expensive, and at around $160 is quite a bit more than all of the other entries in this. I'm running them all through the same impulse response. I'm using a Mesa Oversized from Seacow cabs with both a DV77 and a Vintage 30 blended together. I just wanted to pick an IR that was not included with any of these amps or matched to any of these amps to give them an advantage. So without any further ado, let's get into the shootout. And I want you, before I reveal the answers, tell me right down in the comments which one you think is the best, and don't change it when I tell you the answer, because that's not fair. All right, here are the results. Amp A is the Poulin Legion. Amp B is the Archetype Gojira Hot Amp. Amp C is the Sigma V2 from Audio Assault. Amp D is the Le456 by Poulin. Amp E is the Archetype Gojira Rust Amp. And Amp F is the Ignite Emissary. I'd be hard-pressed to really pick a winner. And it's hard because I know which ones they are, and I know which ones I prefer to use and to play, and I know which ones cost more, but nonetheless, I'd say if I heard these in a mix, they would all sound good, and I think I've got them all dialed in to a point where at least I like how they sound. Now, I did try to match the tone of these amps as closely as I could, and I learned a few things in that process too. For one, a lot of amps have a master volume control. This is not the level or the output volume. There's an actual master knob, and that one is the power amp section. So you can really get a big difference in character on a lot of amps by using that power amp section. When it's up louder, you're going to get a thicker sound, more distortion, though it's not quite the same as the preamp distortion. It will make things a bit messier and looser, but it will also thicken things up a lot. So finding the right spot to have the master volume in conjunction with the preamp drive control makes a big difference. And sometimes the master volume also has a big control over the EQ and changes sort of the mid character and how compressed the amp is. So that is something worth checking out and dialing in, and really helped me to match some of these amps closer together when I realized that that was a big part of the sound. You can get them all to have a similar feel and response to everything. Setting up your distortion around palm-muted chugs really also helps to dial in the right amount. And I did everything by ear, so it's as close as I could get it. On those palm-muted chugs, you can hear more clearly the amount of distortion, and sort of If it's less, they will be tighter and clearer. If it's too little, they won't have the power and the girth you want, but too much and you'll start to get sort of a trailing fuzz after all the chugs. I like to dial that back in so that they are still tight, but they're thick and sort of as much distortion as I can without going into messiness, at least for a modern, clean, high gain tone. I noticed when switching IRs that even if I had all the amps dialed into each other before and they were sounding very similar, that would suddenly change and suddenly they might sound quite a bit different from each other going through a different IR. So that is something, I don't really know the relevance of it, but it is interesting. And it's curious to me that two amps that sound very similar with one speaker can sound pretty different with another speaker. But I don't know what to do with that. This test definitely surprised me. I was expecting a much bigger difference, and I was expecting to find some kind of secret sauce, the mystery element, the mojo that gave a more expensive, newer sim better response, better sound, anything. And I'm hard-pressed to find it exactly. The Neural DSP amps, one thing they really have going for them is that the default tones sound awesome, which I love. Right out of the box, you load it up, it sounds great. That's not the case for all these amps. And some of them, most of them just start with all the knobs at noon, which is okay. But I do think that Neural is smart to make the default, when you open the plugin, you've got a good tone right off the bat. You can use that. There's nothing wrong with it. You don't have to tweak stuff forever. I wish more developers would take their lead and make the default startup sound something that's really good. Because some of these, you load them up, they're okay. They're not terrible, but there's nothing too special to it. And I think that is one big strong suit with Neural, and one reason they usually do really well in these kind of shootouts. And maybe you disagree with me, and maybe you think that some of these just sounded leagues ahead of the others. I don't exactly hear it. And I've seen that in some tests in other people's shootouts, so I was kind of curious to do my own and see, well, maybe they just didn't dial them in right. I'm sure that I could have dialed them in a little bit better too. I've seen some where I think the difference is really almost night and day. And I think here, that's not so much the case. I think they're all really good. The Sigma was kind of the hardest to dial in. It tends to be dark and maybe a little bit flabby. I was really impressed by the 456, the Engel model from Poulin, a sim that I think came out in 2010 and was released for free. It sounds really good, and it's got a nice clarity and chunk and beef to it that I think was just naturally made sense with the amp and sounded really good off the bat. So that's actually one of my favorites. The Neural amps also sound great. I'm a big fan of those. I was surprised how similar the two channels really were when I dialed them in to each other. But of course the knobs are in different places, but in the end they have a similar enough sound. I think the hot amp is a little more upper mids aggressive and it has a lot more gain on tap, and it might just be a little tighter. It can be a little fizzy sometimes. The Rust amp tends to want to be a little bit darker and mushier. One is not necessarily better than the other. The Emissary is another great amp, and I've used that plenty. I like it a lot. It's got a clean channel that basically goes totally clean, and the EQ on the gain section has two bands. So you've got a low mid and a high mid, as well as some extra little controls in there. That's really nice. I enjoy that. So that's about all I have to say on this, and I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something. I certainly feel like I learned something, so that's good enough for me. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you aren't already. You know the drill. We'll see you in the next video. Cheers.